Part 5. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wu Nian. Chapter 41. Early the next morning. In order to adjust the biological clock that was in chaos due to being chased by the black swan, Chen Tao took Ziyiqing for a walk in a nearby park early. The only difference between the Dar district and the rich district is that there is no black swan law here. Apart from this, everything else is basically the same as the rich district. People have jobs and children have to go to school. After all, time is still flowing on your wrist, and time must be earned through work. Not everyone likes taking risks, such as robbery. After all, no one can guarantee that in the Tal district, he will be shot dead on the way because he robbed someone. In their district, work is still safer than robbery. Although there are no legal restrictions in the Tal district, it can maintain a delicate balance. Because it is working time now, the park is quiet. Chen Tao looked at Ziyiqing beside him. Ziyiqing held Chen Tao's arm and looked around with big eyes. There are green trees on the right side of this park and clear lake water on the left side. The wind blew, carrying a clear breath. It feels good. Ziyiqing had a smile on her face. Chen Tao said, the slum area is under the jurisdiction of Black Swan. We may not be able to go back. I'm sorry. I brought you here. Chen Tao feels pity and guilt for Ziyiqing. The person who violated the Black Swan regulations was Chen Tao. Ziyiqing did not break the law. She could have continued to live in the slums she was familiar with. But he was brought here by Chen Tao, and he can never go back to the slums. Ziyiqing was slightly startled. She looked at Chen Tao, she smiled and said, compared to the slums, this Tal district feels much more prosperous. And it is difficult for me to live in the slums. Now I have you to support me, I'm very happy, and I don't think it matters whether I go back to a place like the ghetto. The important thing is that you are here. Ziyiqing looked at Chen Tao, with a hint of luster in her big eyes. Chen Tao smiled and stroked her hair. Little sister, aren't you bored here alone? Go to your brother's house and he will play with you, okay? At this time, Chen Tao heard a voice. Chen Tao, who heard the sound, looked forward subconsciously. A girl is sitting on a park bench, next to the girl. A thin man stood on the bench, holding the girl's chin with his hand and staring at the girl. With a smile that only a man could understand on his face, the man stared at the girl. The girl's face turned pale. She turned her face to the other side and said, "Please don't do this." After saying that, she got up from the bench and walked out. When the man was rejected, he frowned and said, "Huh." He took the girl's wrist and pulled the girl back onto the bench. The man took out a switchblade from his trouser pocket with his other hand, and the switchblade lit up. The blade reflected the sun's rays. The man pressed the blade against the girl's neck. The girl's face was pale, and she looked at the man nervously. The man smiled coldly and said, "Want to run away? Let me tell you, no woman I like can run away. If you don't want to follow my brother to my house, then I will play with you here." The girl's eyes were filled with tears and she said, "No. Please spare me." Chen Tao and Ziyiqing stood not far away. The two looked at each other. Chen Tao looked away, looked over there, and said, "Hey." Both the man and the girl heard the noise here, and they looked over. Chen Tao looked at the man and said calmly, "Let her go." When the man heard this, he frowned and said, "You want to meddle in my business?" He waved the switchblade in his hand. "Aren't you afraid that a white knife will go in and a red knife will come out?" The man squinted his eyes and stared at Chen Tao. Chen Tao was silent for a moment. He pulled out a pistol from his waist and pointed it at the man. The man's mouth opened slightly. Bang! A gunshot rang out and bullets fell at the man's feet. The man jumped, turned around and ran away. All of a sudden the person was gone. Seeing this, Chen Tao put away his pistol and looked at the girl next to him. When he took a look, he found that the girl was actually someone he had met yesterday. When the girl saw Chen Tao, she stood up and said to Chen Tao, "Brother, you saved me again. Thank you. This girl is the girl who was hit by a car yesterday. Why is she here?" Chen Tao said, "Aren't you going to school at this time? Why are you here?" When the girl heard this, she pursed her lower lip and said, "I forgot. Forgot. Forgot to go to school?" Chen Tao said, "Then you can go to school now." With that said, Chen Tao was planning to leave with Zi Cheng. "No, I mean, I forgot which school I went to." Chen Tao paused. He remembered something. Yesterday when Nebula was repairing the girl's body, she said that the girl's stored memories were destroyed. Could it be a memory about school? Chen Tao looked at the girl and said, "Don't you remember which school you went to?" The girl nodded slightly and said, "Well, I remember I have to go to school, but I forgot which school I went to. I originally wanted to go home, but I don't know where home is. I have no other choice, so I'll spend the night here. I slept on this chair all night, but as soon as I got up, I met that man." The girl's face was full of despair and she said, "I don't know what to do." Hearing this, Chen Tao said, "Do you have a cell phone? There should be a contact list in the cell phone, which probably records the cell phone numbers of her relatives." The girl lowered her head slightly and said, "My cell phone is gone." Gone. Chen Tao thought about it and remembered. Yesterday, she was hit by that car, and her cell phone probably flew out with it. Under that kind of force, even if she finds the cell phone, it is probably useless. This is troublesome. For this kind of amnesiac girl, in places other than the Tal district, she can be handed over to the Black Swan Security Bureau, and those people will be responsible for sending her to her relatives. But the problem is that there is no Black Swan in the Tal district. "What's your name?" Ziking came to the girl and asked. When the girl heard this, she looked at Ziking and said, "My name is Li Xiaolu." Ziking smiled and said, "Now you can't contact your relatives, and you don't know the location of your school, so stay with me first. Otherwise, it's dangerous for you to walk around outside alone." When Li Xiaolu heard this, she looked at Ziking and nodded slightly, "Yeah." Ziking raised her hand and held Li Xiaolu's hand. She looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile, "Let's help her." When Chen Tao heard this, he touched the back of his head and said, "Okay. Anyway, I'm free." Chen Tao said, "Let's go back first." A black shadow flew over and slowly stopped. It was Black Lightning. The Black Lightning car slowly stopped and the door opened automatically. Chen Tao said, "Get in the car. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 42. Return to the villa. Chen Tao opened the door. As soon as he opened it, Chen Tao saw a beautiful figure sitting on the sofa in the living room. It was He Yuxuan. He Yuxuan was wearing a silk night dress, sitting on the sofa with her legs crossed, holding the remote control in her hand and looking at the TV. Noticing someone coming in, He Yuxuan's eyebrows stretched slightly, and a smile appeared on her face. "Master, are you back?" He Yuxuan's sitting posture is casual, and her thin clothes perfectly reveal her curves. Chen Tao said, "Well, don't you have to go to work?" Hearing this, He Yuxuan said with a smile, "Master, the 2,000 years you gave me, I don't think I can spend all this money in my life. Where do I need to do any work? Over there in the clothing store, I hired a store manager, ask that person to watch it for me." He Yuxuan noticed Li Xiaolu and said, "Who is she?" Chen Tao said, "This is Li Xiaolu. She had some accidents and lost her memory. We are going to help her. You seem to be very idle now, and idle time is idle. You know this place better. Come and help her. See if you can. I can't give her any help." He Yuxuan blinked and looked at Li Xiaolu. She showed a friendly smile and said, come here and let me take a look. Li Xiaolu looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, she is He Yuxuan. She will help you. She knows much more about Tal district than me. Li Xiaolu nodded slightly and walked to He Yuxuan. He Yuxuan looked at Li Xiaolu and said with a smile, you are so beautiful. When you grow up, you must be a great beauty. Li Xiaolu's face turned slightly red. What He Yuxuan said was not wrong. Li Xiaolu looked 16 or 17 years old, but she was very good looking. Her ink-like long hair was tied into a single ponytail, exposing her white neck. She had a delicate face, long eyelashes, big eyes, a high nose bridge, and a small cherry mouth. The appearance can be said to be very high. She has a slender figure, a standard waist, a slim waist, and her long and straight legs, which makes her look full of beauty. Chen Tao didn't want to waste time and changed the topic. He said, okay, let's get down to business. It's business. He Yuxuan looked at Li Xiaolu and smiled, Master doesn't like to talk about such things, so let's talk about business. Master, what are you going to do next? He Yuxuan looked at Chen Tao and said, should we keep Li Xiaolu and give her a job so that she can live independently, or should we support her? Chen Tao closed his eyes helplessly, touched the back of his head, and said, she lost her memory and forgot the school she went to before. She also forgot the location of her home and no contact information of her parents. I want to she got her family back and returned to her own home. He Yuxuan looked at Li Xiaolu and said, looking at your age, you should be in college or university. Our college here has Leda College. Do you know Leda College? He Yuxuan wanted to use the method of introducing the school to evoke some of Li Xiaolu's memories. Li Xiaolu shook his head. What about Linboi Junior College? Not impressed. Where's the University of Earthsea? Li Xiaolu shook her head again. He Yuxuan frowned slightly, Kumquat University. Never heard of it. Li Xiaolu shook her head again. He Yuxuan said, aren't you even impressed? No impression, Li Xiaolu said softly. Well, this amnesia is a bit complete. I have already mentioned all the possible schools around here. He Yuxuan pursed her lower lip and said. Chen Tao said, maybe you can drive her to those schools to have a look, maybe she will have an impression. He Yuxuan nodded. She looked at Li Xiaolu and said with a smile, okay, then I'll go change clothes. He Yuxuan stood up and walked inside. Chen Tao said, Li Xiaolu will be left to you. Zicheng and I have other things to do. He Yuxuan walked inside and said, okay. Chen Tao looked at Li Xiaolu and said, follow her and she will help you. Li Xiaolu hummed and said, thank you, brother. Chen Tao raised his hand and gently stroked her little head. He took back his hand, looked at Zicheng, and said, let's go. Zicheng looked at Li Xiaolu, then she looked at Chen Tao, aren't we going together? I'm a little worried. Hearing this, Chen Tao said, we are not familiar with this place. We were just spectators in the past and cannot be of much help. Instead of wasting time, let's do something of our own. Zicheng nodded slightly. Chen Tao said, let's go. He took Zicheng out of the door. The black car was parked in front of the yard. As Chen Tao and Zicheng approached, the car lights came on and the car door slowly opened. Chen Tao and Zicheng got into the car together. Chen Tao drove his car on the street. Zicheng looked at Chen Tao and said, where should we go next? Chen Tao said, buy a house. Although Yuxuan doesn't mind us living together, no matter what, it is someone else's house. Zicheng nodded slightly, yes, but, this is Tal district. Is there any place for sale in Tal district? She looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes, with a hint of doubt in her eyes. This is a problem. Chen Tao took out his mobile phone and put it in front of him. Little T. The light on the right side of the phone lights up, and the light is a three-dimensional projector, which is projected to the front and turns into a little person. Master, do you have any instructions? That villain is the smart villain that comes with the T3 mobile phone. Chen Tao said, is there any place for sale recently? The Tal district is not like the Black Swan district. There is no sales office here. But there is an auction house in the Tal district. Sometimes the auction house will auction high-end villas. T3's voice sounded slowly. Chen Tao said, is there an auction now? Yes, there is an auction every Wednesday, 24 hours a time. Today happens to be Wednesday, T3 said. Navigate, I want to attend the auction. Okay, master. As T3's voice fell, a mini screen appeared. This is exactly a map with a red dot on the map. Turn on navigation mode. T3's voice came. Chen Tao glanced at the map, and then said, Black Lightning, follow this map to navigate forward. The car lights lit up. Received the command, turn on the automatic driving mode. With the navigation of T3's mobile phone, plus the automatic driving system of the Black Lightning car, Chen Tao almost didn't need to do anything. The car sent Chen Tao to a building. The car door opened automatically. Chen Tao and Ziking got out of the car together. Chen Tao looked at the building in front of him and walked in. Ziking followed. In front of the building's gate, stood a man in a black suit. When the man saw Chen Tao, he raised his hand and held it across Chen Tao's body. He looked at Chen Tao and said, Excuse me, what can I do for you? Isn't this building a public place? Chen Tao looked at the man and said, We are here to attend the auction. When the man heard this, he withdrew his hand and said, Do you have an invitation? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 43. Do I need an invitation to attend the auction? This was something Chen Tao had not expected. Chen Tao looked at the man and said, I don't have an invitation. The man frowned slightly when he heard this, I can't let you in without an invitation. The only way to buy a house in the Tal district is this auction house. If he leaves directly without getting in, where will Chen Tao find his house in the future? He must attend this auction. Chen Tao looked at the man and said, What if I insist on going in? The man frowned and said lightly, Sir, please don't embarrass me. Chen Tao said, I don't intend to embarrass you, but I will definitely attend this auction today. Oh, isn't this Boss Chen? Suddenly, Chen Tao heard a voice. He looked back and saw a man. It was a man he knew. Wang Xing. Wang Xing got out of the car, closed the door, stared at Chen Tao, and said playfully, What? Boss Chen is also attending the auction. The auction here is held once a week, and it is normal to meet Wang Xing during this time. After all, Wang Xing is also a person of some status. Wang Xing walked over here, he looked at Chen Tao playfully, and said, What? Boss Chen can't get in without an invitation? Oh, yes, that's right, Boss Chen is just the owner of a small restaurant. How could he have an invitation? Wang Xing looked at the man guarding the door and said with a smile, You are too embarrassed for our Boss Chen. Asking him for an invitation is simply embarrassing him, he said sarcastically. While speaking, Wang Xing glanced at Chen Tao and said, Let Lin Ku block my door in my hotel, remember this. After speaking, Wang Xing stepped into the building. A hand was across Wang Xing's body. Wang Xing was slightly startled, and he looked at the owner of the hand, the man guarding the door. The man looked at Wang Xing and said, Your invitation. When Wang Xing heard this, his eyebrows slightly relaxed and his hand reached for the pocket of his suit. Time stood still. Chen Tao looked at Wang Xing, who had turned into code mode, and he walked over and stretched out his hand. Take out the invitation from Wang Xing's pocket. Now Chen Tao can't see the appearance of the invitation, because the invitation is also in code mode. It is a card-like thing, the size of a palm. All the codes are 1 or 0. This is a substance in the inner world, but Chen Tao can change it as long as he thinks about it. The invitation turned into its original appearance. The code disappeared. Chen Tao saw the real appearance of the invitation. Chen Tao took a look and saw that there were words written in the invitation, and the content was to invite others to participate in the auction. The only difference is that there is a place to fill in the name, and the name is Wang Xing's name. Chen Tao said, "Xingyuan, analyze the invitation." The mechanical voice sounded in Chen Tao's mind. Analyzing. The invitation automatically turned into code mode. Analysis completed. Chen Tao said, "Change Wang Xing to Chen Tao." Received the instruction, delete the code about Wang Xing. Deleting completed, rewriting. Chen Tao watched as part of the code of the invitation disappeared. Writing completed. The part of the code that disappeared was replaced by the new code. Chen Tao took the invitation, and the invitation changed back to its original appearance from code. Chen Tao took a look and found that the name in the invitation had changed to Chen Tao's name. Seeing this, Chen Tao retracted his sight and put the invitation into his pocket. Time resumed flowing. Wang Xing put his hand into his pocket, glanced at Chen Tao, and said, "The Tal auction is not something that people like you can participate in. Only people of my status are qualified to receive invitations and enter the Tal auction. And you should go back to manage your small restaurant." He touched his pocket and found that he didn't touch the invitation, so he frowned. He reached for another pocket. "My invitation." Wang Xing reached for his trouser pocket and touched it. Wang Xing's face changed. Watching Wang Xing's actions, the gatekeeper said lightly, "Boss Wang, if you don't have an invitation, according to the rules, I can't let you in." "Strange, I clearly put it in my pocket," Wang Xing muttered to himself. Chen Tao looked at Wang Xing and said, "You can't find your invitation, and mine just happened to be found." Wang Xing was stunned. He looked at Chen Tao, "Do you have an invitation?" Chen Tao took out the invitation from his pocket and was about to hand it to the man. Wang Xing's pupils condensed slightly, and he said, "This is my invitation. Give it back to me." He stretched out his hand to grab the invitation from Chen Tao's hand. Chen Tao frowned and retracted his hand. He looked at Wang Xing and said, "Boss Wang, what do you mean?" Wang Xing stared at Chen Tao and said, "You must have taken my invitation just now, otherwise, how could my invitation be missing? How could you, the owner of a small restaurant, receive an invitation to the Tal auction? And you clearly didn't have an invitation just now," Wang Xing said, "you must have stolen it." Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and said, "I stole your invitation? I say, Boss Wang, you have to provide evidence when you speak." Wang Xing sneered and said, "Give me back the invitation letter, and I can prove it. This invitation letter is mine, and my name is written on it. Just open it and you will know." Chen Tao looked at Wang Xing and said, "I'll give it to you. I dare not give you my invitation letter. What if you tear it up?" Wang Xing's eyebrows stretched and stared at Chen Tao. He smiled and said, "Oh, you are panicking, right? You can't stand hearing that my name is in the invitation letter, right? Stealing things, haha, do you think anyone can use this invitation letter?" Wang Xing said, "Since you don't want to show it to me, let the security guard see it and see if the name on the invitation letter is my Wang Xing. Haha." He sneered a few times, staring at Chen Tao with disdain. Chen Tao retracted his gaze and handed the invitation letter in his hand to the man guarding the door. He said, "Please take a look and see who this invitation letter belongs to." Wang Xing looked at Chen Tao's indifferent look and frowned. "But think about it later." Thinking of Chen Tao's attitude of not being able to produce the invitation letter just now, and then thinking of the disappearance of his invitation letter. He was almost 100% sure that Chen Tao had stolen his. Wang Xing had just been in contact with Chen Tao for a while. If Chen Tao had stolen it, it would be impossible for him to change his name in a short time. Wang Xing was relieved. His eyebrows were relaxed. He crossed his arms and watched quietly, waiting to see Chen Tao's joke. The security guard opened the invitation letter and looked at the contents inside. Wang Xing hurriedly asked, "Really? The name inside is my Wang Xing, right?" The security guard glanced at Wang Xing and said lightly, "Boss Wang, please don't make trouble." Upon hearing this, Wang Xing was stunned. "What do you mean? Make trouble? My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 44. Wang Xing was a little confused. He looked at Chen Tao. This guy stole his invitation letter and gave it to the security guard, but the security guard said he was making trouble for no reason. Wang Xing frowned, looked at the security guard, and said, "I don't quite understand, this guy obviously stole my invitation letter. Why do you still say I am making trouble for no reason? That is my invitation letter." The security guard glanced at Wang Xing, picked up the invitation letter, turned around, and faced Wang Xing, so that Wang Xing could see the text inside. The security guard said, "Boss Wang, please look carefully, is the name on this invitation letter your name?" Wang Xing carefully looked at the content on the invitation letter, his face changed slightly. How is this possible? Wang Xing can be sure that it must be Chen Tao who stole his invitation letter, but the text written on the invitation letter in front of him is not his name. In that short period of time, it is impossible for Chen Tao to steal the invitation letter and change the name on the invitation letter at the same time. This is simply impossible. Does Chen Tao really own the invitation letter? This is impossible. If Chen Tao had it just now, why did he talk to the security guard like that? Wang Xing looked at Chen Tao. "When you talked to the security guard just now, didn't you say you would force your way in? If you have an invitation letter, why did you say that?" Chen Tao looked at Wang Xing, who was puzzled, and said, "Didn't I say it? I didn't find it before, I just found it. No. It can't be such a coincidence. You stole my invitation letter and changed the name on it. It must be you." Wang Xing was almost certain that it must be Chen Tao who did it. "Boss Wang, do you think I'm a fool?" The security guard next to him was a little unhappy when he heard Wang Xing say that. Wang Xing was stunned, and he looked at the security guard. The security guard frowned and said, "I have been here just now. If Mr. Chen stole it just now, I would definitely see it. And if the text on this invitation letter has been changed, there must be traces, and there is no trace on this invitation letter. It can be confirmed that Mr. Chen's name was written on it for the first time." Hearing the security guard's assurance, Wang Xing opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but couldn't. After all, that's what they said. The security guard put away the invitation letter and put it on the table beside him, then looked at Chen Tao and said, "Mr. Chen, please." Chen Tao nodded slightly and took Ziking into the building. Looking at Chen Tao's back, Wang Xing clenched his fists, his face gloomy, and gritted his teeth. This bastard. Wang Xing felt very strange, but he had no way to prove that it was Chen Tao who stole it. He could only stare at Chen Tao. Chen Tao entered the building and came to the lobby on the first floor. The lobby was spacious and empty. Looking forward in the lobby, you can see a 3-meter-long desk, in front of which are several women in professional attire. When the women saw Chen Tao coming in, they all looked over here. One of the women took the initiative to stand up. She walked out of the counter, with a professional smile on her face, and greeted Chen Tao. "Sir, please follow me," the woman said with a smile. Chen Tao and Ziking followed the woman. The woman brought Chen Tao and Ziking to the counter. She picked up a number plate and handed it to Chen Tao. She smiled and said, "This is a prop needed for the auction. You can wear it on your chest. Then please follow me, the auction is now being held on the third floor." She walked forward. As she walked, she introduced herself, "My name is Pan Kairong, and I am a waitress here. Sir, I am unfamiliar with you. What is your name?" There was an elevator in front of them, and the elevator door opened. The three of them entered the elevator. Chen Tao said, "My last name is Chen." Pan Kairong smiled when she heard it. Mr. Chen, is this lady your wife? She is so beautiful." Chen Tao nodded slightly. Ziking was a little happy to be praised, even if she was of the same sex, and she smiled, "My name is Ziking." Pan Kairong nodded slightly and said with a smile, "Miss Zi." Ding dong. As she spoke, the elevator had arrived. After all, it was on the second floor, very close. The elevator door slowly opened. After opening, Chen Tao could see a long corridor. There were lights hanging on the walls on the left and right sides of the corridor. The lights were on, illuminating the long corridor. There was a big door at the end of the corridor. Pan Kairong brought Chen Tao and Ziking to the door. She stretched out her hand and pushed the door open. As soon as the door opened, Chen Tao felt his eyes brighten. This was a bright and spacious auction house. There were many people sitting in the auction house. On the high platform in front, a woman stood on the high platform, presiding over the auction. The woman was wearing a tight white dress. The close-fitting dress fit her figure. She held her waist tightly, and the upper body held up the white fabric high. The skirt was very short, and her legs were slender and straight, matched with a pair of white stockings, and high heels on her feet. It set off her tall figure to the fullest. Her long hair was tied into a single ponytail, revealing her beautiful face. She had a smile on her face, and she looked sunny and lovely. This auction really knows how to do business. The host's figure and appearance alone are enough to raise the price of the items being auctioned by several levels. "Mr. Chen, please come and sit here." A voice came from the side. It was Pan Kairong's voice. Pan Kairong was standing next to a chair, looking at Chen Tao. Chen Tao nodded slightly, and he walked over. "Sit on a chair." Ziking also walked over and sat on the chair next to Chen Tao. Chen Tao's sight fell on the stage. At this time, a waitress came over and handed Pan Kairong 2 tablets. Pan Kairong handed the tablet to Chen Tao. Chen Tao took a look and took it. Pan Kairong smiled and said, "This tablet has information about all the items auctioned today. You can take a closer look." "So convenient." Chen Tao opened the tablet, and sure enough, the tablet recorded various auction items. Chen Tao planned to see if there was a villa for auction. But before he had time to take a closer look, he was attracted by one of the auction items. "What is this?" The auction item was not anything else, but a pair of eyes stored in a jar. The eyes were blue in color and very clear, just like a pair of sapphires. But, these are still eyes, not gems. "This auctioning eyes?" Pan Kairong said with a smile, "These are the eyes of the Kakyao people. The Kakyao people are a very special race. Their eyes are blue, very clear blue, and their eyes are called sapphires. For some reason, the Kakyao people disappeared. Then these eyes are the last collection. Many organ collectors like this." Pan Kairong looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile, "If Mr. Chen is interested, you can pay attention to it." "Pay attention?" Chen Tao is not an organ collector. He never thought that this auction would actually auction eyes. It's really shocking. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 45. Chen Tao did not think much about it. Maybe this is the life of the rich, he does not understand this. "Boss Wang, please sit here." Suddenly, Chen Tao heard a voice. Boss Wang? Chen Tao subconsciously looked at the source of the voice. I saw a waitress standing next to a chair. Wang Xing walked over there and sat on a chair. Seeing Wang Xing, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. He can also enter without an invitation? At this time, Chen Tao saw a man wearing glasses and a white suit, who also sat down and sat next to Wang Xing. Wang Xing smiled at the man in white and said, "Thanks to Brother Gao Peng, if it weren't for Brother Gao Peng, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to come to today's auction." Gao Peng said lightly, "It's just a small matter, don't forget to bring the invitation next time." Wang Xing nodded slightly. "Gao Peng?" Chen Tao retracted his gaze. Thinking back, yes, Wang Xing can get an invitation, so he naturally has someone in this tall auction house. Since there are people, it is normal for them to come in without an invitation. Chen Tao was too lazy to think about it. "Dear, how about this villa?" Ziking's voice came from beside him. Chen Tao looked back and looked at the tablet in Ziking's hand. The tablet showed a villa. Ziking said, "I read the introduction of this villa and it feels good." Chen Tao said, "Well, let me take a look." He picked up his tablet and found the villa that Ziking liked. The name of the villa is Birch Garden. The villa has its own yard, and there are tracts of birch trees in the yard, so it is called Birch Garden. The villa is also well designed and has its own outdoor swimming pool. "Not bad," Chen Tao said. Ziking had a smile on her face. The auction of Birch Garden will be held in a while, and Chen Tao looked at the other auction items. Suddenly, his eyes were attracted by the auction items under Birch Garden. That is also a villa, but different from Birch Garden. This villa covers a large area. It is almost a private manor. The villa is named after the manor, Yuehu Manor. There is only one villa in the manor, which covers a large area and has various facilities, including private indoor hot springs, private indoor golf, private parking garage, etc. There is also a lake in the manor. Compared with Beihua Yuan, this one can beat Beihua Yuan. "Dear, it's about to start." Upon hearing this, Chen Tao came back to his senses. He looked at Ziking, and Ziking looked at the stage. Looking at Ziking's expression, Chen Tao also looked at the stage. There was a model next to the beautiful host. This model was the Beihua Yuan that Chen Tao had just seen on the tablet. The beautiful host said with a smile, "This time we are going to auction a high-end villa, the Birch Garden." The Birch Garden has its own yard, and there is a birch forest in the yard. The trees are full of white leaves. When the leaves fall beautifully, they look like white snow, which is particularly beautiful. In addition to the white birch leaves that look like snow, this villa also has its own outdoor bath. It covers a large area. This is a relatively rare high-end villa in this area. The beautiful host continued, "This time, at the request of its original owner, the starting price of the auction is 130 years, and the increase in price must not be less than 1 year. She looked at the people around her and said with a smile, "The auction begins. 131 years. 135 years. 140 years. 141. 150 years, suddenly, a voice sounded. Hearing this voice, everyone looked over there. The one who spoke was Wang Xing. Wang Xing crossed his arms and smiled. He was determined to get the Birch Garden. Wang Xing's goal this time was for the Birch Garden. For so many years, Wang Xing has not bought a villa of his own. He has always wanted to buy one, but he has never met a satisfactory one. Until Wang Xing heard the news that the Birch Garden was going to change its owner, he was moved. He kept staring at the Birch Garden. He had made a lot of preparations for this Birch Garden. The beautiful host's eyes lit up slightly, and she smiled and said, "Then Mr. Number 44, is there anyone who wants to raise the price for 150 years? 151 years." It seems that someone is unwilling to give up and raised his hand. Wang Xing frowned and raised his hand, 155 years. For this birch garden, he was going to spend a lot of money. Now at the critical moment, he doesn't like to be robbed. When the man heard this, he put his hand down and stopped raising it. Wang Xing smiled. When Wang Xing thought that the birch garden had been firmly won, 200 years, a voice suddenly sounded. Hearing this voice, Wang Xing's smile was restrained. He frowned and looked at the source of the voice. Chen Tao sat there with his hand raised. Seeing this, Wang Xing's face darkened. Chen Tao, it's you again. Chen Tao slowly retracted his hand, glanced at Wang Xing, and said lightly, I should be the one asking you this question. I just took a fancy to this villa, why are you competing with me again? Wang Xing clenched his fist, stared at Chen Tao, and said, you want to compete with me, right? Okay. He raised his hand, 230 years. For this birch garden, in order to fight for his dignity, Wang Xing was going to bleed a little. 230 years, this is not a small amount. Ordinary people will never see so much time in their lifetime. Wang Xing originally expected to spend 200 years to buy the villa, but now there are 30 more years, which is already beyond his budget. Chen Tao raised his hand. 250 years. Upon hearing this, Wang Xing's breath was restrained, and he glanced at Chen Tao. Chen Tao crossed his arms and watched quietly. 250 years. This birch garden has been valued by a professional, and the highest is only 200 years. If it is higher, it will be a loss. Wang Xing has already taken the risk of losing money and bid for 230 years, but this guy is still bidding. Wang Xing clenched his fist. He was very unhappy, very unhappy. He just felt his head getting hot, raised his hand, and said, 260 years. 260 years is already a big loss. This is Wang Xing's last bottom line. In order to fight for his pride, he must grab this birch garden. Chen Tao raised his hand, 300 years. When Chen Tao spoke, there was almost no hesitation. Seeing this, Wang Xing was stunned. He looked at Chen Tao, are you crazy? 300 years, and you bought a villa worth only 100 years? Are you going to fight me to the end? Chen Tao glanced at Wang Xing and said lightly, you overestimate yourself. Wang Xing frowned and clenched his fists. Targeted, this is targeted. But 300 years. Wang Xing doesn't have that much time, he sat down helplessly. The beautiful host's eyes lit up, she smiled and said, then Beiwa Yuan 300 years, is there a higher bid? The auction hall was very quiet. The beautiful host smiled, she looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile, then Beiwa Yuan will be sold to Mr. Number 38 at the price of 300 years. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 46. Hearing the beautiful host announce Chen Tao's ownership of Beiwa Garden, Wang Xing stared at Chen Tao with gritted teeth, as if he wanted to bite off a piece of meat from Chen Tao. This guy still said that he was not targeting him. It took 300 years to buy Beiwa Garden to target him. 300 years, that is not a small amount. If it was not targeting him, how could it take 300 years? Just when Wang Xing was in an unusually bad mood, a new model was brought on stage. This model is more than 10 times larger than the Beiwa Garden just now. The whole model is a large manor, and in the middle of the model is a luxuriously decorated villa. Seeing the manor, Wang Xing looked at Gao Peng beside him and said with a smile, Brother Gao Peng, this is what you have been waiting for a long time, Yuehu Manor. Gao Peng smiled and said, the original owner of Yuehu Manor didn't want to auction it, but I spent a lot of effort to force him to auction it. I am determined to get this thing now. Wang Xing laughed and said, Brother Gao Peng is still very skilled. Gao Peng held the cane in front of him, smiled, and said nothing. The beautiful host on the stage began to speak. She smiled and said, the model you see now is the model of Yuehu Manor. I believe everyone has heard of Yuehu Manor. It is a top-level villa. There is a lake in the manor. The lake is Yuehu. It used to be a famous tourist attraction in our Tal district. Later, it was bought and turned into this top-level villa. In addition to Yuehu Manor also has indoor and outdoor artificial hot spring pools. The beautiful host smiled and said, there are various facilities in the villa, including a private gym, a private garage, a private indoor golf course, etc. The beautiful host said, the original owner of Yuehu Manor did not intend to sell this top-level villa, but for some reasons, he had to sell it. The reserve price is 700 years, and the increase in price must not be less than 1 year. The beautiful host smiled and said, let's start the bidding. 700 years. This number, this initial price is enough to make people gasp. Even if these are some successful people in Tal district, but this price of 700 years is not something that ordinary people can afford. Once the reserve price is announced, almost half of the people in the auction hall can only sigh. Of course, half of the people still have a certain amount of time. Some people came just for Yuehu Manor. 750 years. A man raised his hand. The first person spoke. Others followed suit. 755 years. 757 years. 760 years. 765. The sound of bidding rose and fell, and it was endless. At this moment, a hand stretched out. 900 years. 900 years. It was 200 years higher than the reserve price. What a big deal, everyone's eyes turned to the source of the sound. Gao Peng was sitting there, holding the cane in front of him with one hand and raising the other hand. It turns out to be the young master Gao of the Gao Group. Gao Group, you mean, the Gao Group of Panchi Company? Yes, that's it. Panchi Company is a subsidiary of Gao Group. The Panchi, a one-car produced by Panchi Company in Tal district, is said to be the most advanced product of this century. Panchi's sales volume is top in Tal district. As the eldest son of Gao Group, he can certainly afford these 900 years. Seeing that it was Gao Peng who made the offer, those people suddenly realized. Gao Peng slowly withdrew his hand, and a smile appeared on his face. Gao Peng prepared a budget of 1,200 years for Yuehu Manor, but now it seems that so much is not needed at all. 1,000 years. Suddenly, a voice sounded. Hearing this voice, everyone present took a breath of cold air. 1,000 years. What a terrible astronomical figure. Everyone's eyes turned to the source of the voice. Who is that? I don't know him. I've never seen him before. Isn't this guy the one who just took the photo of the birch garden? He still has so much time now, 1,000 years, my God. The one who took the photo of 1,000 years was Chen Tao. Chen Tao didn't pay attention to the other people around him. He looked at Ziking beside him and said, will this be better? Ziking looked at the villa in front of her, her eyes lit up slightly. She looked at Chen Tao. Well, it's pretty good, but will it be too expensive? Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, it's okay, it's not expensive. Seeing this, Gao Peng frowned slightly. Wang Xing on the side couldn't help but widen his eyes. 1,000 years. After taking the photo of the birch garden, this man actually still has 1,000 years of time, and he actually wants to take the photo of Yuehu Manor. Targeting. Wang Xing didn't dare to think about it, and he understood it all at once. Chen Tao was not targeting him at all, and Wang Xing was not qualified for him to target. Wang Xing cannot afford to offend someone who can easily take out 1,000 years of time. He overestimated himself when he said that Chen Tao was targeting him. Wang Xing felt his face was burning. He was simply looking for death when he thought of competing with Chen Tao. Gao Peng raised his hand, 1,100 years. For Gao Peng, he was determined to get Yuehu Manor. He put in a lot of energy for this Yuehu Manor, and only then did he force the original owner of the manor to auction this thing. Now, if she is photographed by Chen Tao, it would be like making a wedding dress for Chen Tao. How could Gao Peng bear it? 1,500 years. Chen Tao raised his hand. Since Chen Tao wanted to take pictures of Yuehu Manor, he wouldn't hesitate much. Hearing this voice, Wang Xing's mouth twitched. He looked at Chen Tao. I thought to myself, who is this guy? Is time so worthless to him? Gao Peng's face also turned gloomy. 1,500 years, this was already beyond his budget. Gao Peng gritted his teeth suddenly. He must get this Yuehu Manor. No matter what the cost. Gao Peng raised his hand, 2,000 years, he is bound to win this Yuehu Manor. This sound together. His. People in the auction house couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. 2,000 years. This astronomical figure is simply shocking. The beautiful host's eyes shone slightly, a smile appeared on her face, and she was about to speak. But before the sound could finish, he was interrupted by a voice. 3,000 years. A random voice sounded again not long after Gao Peng's voice fell. Hear this sound. Everyone's eyes fell on Chen Tao. Who is this guy? 3,000 years, is this a joke? Who is he? How come there is so much time? Oh my god, 3,000 years. Damn, 3,000 years, this is too exaggerated. Everyone was shocked by the time Chen Tao had. But Gao Peng's face was extremely gloomy at the moment, and his fists were clenched tightly. 3,000 years, even Gao Peng can no longer continue bidding with Chen Tao. The beautiful host's cheeks were flushed and her eyes were bright. She was very excited. She said, 3,000 years, I don't think there is a higher bid. Then the Yuehu Manor was handed over to this gentleman at the price of 3,000 years. Thank you, sir, for your generosity. On behalf of Tal Auction House and the original owner of this villa, thank you. The beautiful host bowed to Chen Tao and smiled gratefully. Thanks. The host of the auction actually said thank you to the auctioneer. This was probably the first time. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 47. Hearing the beautiful host's thanks, Chen Tao nodded slightly and said nothing. Gao Peng on the other side had a gloomy face. Zhao Tai, Gao Peng said. The man in black standing behind Gao Peng approached Gao Peng. Gao Peng said, investigate, I want to know the information of that guy. Yes, Zhao Tai responded and turned away. Gao Peng stared at Chen Tao, his eyes narrowed slightly, and slowly retracted his gaze. Chen Tao looked at Pan Kairong beside him and said, we have bought what we want. Where do we pay now? Pan Kairong smiled and said, please wait a moment. She looked at a waitress not far away and waved her hand. The waitress walked over here. Pan Kairong put away the tablet computer in Chen Tao and Ziking's hands and handed it to the waitress. The waitress took it and left. Pan Kairong looked at Chen Tao and smiled and said, please follow me. Pan Kairong turned and walked out. Chen Tao and Ziking also stood up and followed Pan Kairong. Chen Tao's leaving back affected other people in the auction, including the beautiful host. The beautiful host looked at Chen Tao's leaving back, she retracted her gaze, looked at everyone, and said with a smile, it's almost time, Wu Yao's hosting is over. Then the next host will be another host to help host this auction. Chen Tao and Ziking followed Pan Kairong, took the elevator, and went to the third floor. After a long corridor, they came to the door of a room. Pan Kairong opened the door of the room. She entered the room and smiled at Chen Tao, you two take a rest here first. In a while, Our auction will have someone come to accompany you to handle the formalities. It will be very fast. Chen Tao looked at the room. It was a hall. There were sofas and tables in the hall. There were floor-to-ceiling windows on the right, and you could see the scenery outside. Some of the floor-to-ceiling windows were opened, and the wind was blowing, and the room was still cool. Chen Tao and Ziking sat down. Pan Kairong poured a glass of water for Chen Tao and Ziking. She smiled and said, "Please wait a moment." She walked to the landline beside her. She picked up the landline and dialed the number. "Hello, Mr. Number 38 wants to settle the auction items. Please deal with it quickly." After that, she hung up the landline, and then stood there, looking at Chen Tao and Ziking, with a professional smile on her face. She said, "If you need anything, just tell Qi Rong will meet your needs." Chen Tao nodded slightly. He was too lazy to say anything, picked up the water cup, slowly stood up, he walked to the French window, and looked at the scenery outside. Chen Tao doesn't like to sit. If he can stand up, he won't sit. This is a habit of his. Especially when waiting for someone, he doesn't like to sit even more, it feels too boring. Chen Tao can see the scenery outside through the French window. He was a little thirsty, so he drank some water. Crack. Suddenly, there was a sound at the door. Chen Tao turned his head to look. I saw a beautiful figure walking in from outside the door. Seeing this woman, Chen Tao's eyebrows slightly relaxed. This woman is the beautiful host Wu Yao who was just on the high platform. Wu Yao changed her clothes. She was wearing a black business suit with a white shirt. The female business suit fits her body, her waist is gathered, and the fabric on the upper body is held up high. The short skirt is matched with black stockings. The perfect and mature figure is matched with a pair of black high heels. Her figure is simply impeccable. Her long black hair is tied up naturally, revealing her beautiful face. This appearance is amazing. The woman had a professional smile on her face. She looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile, "Sorry, I changed my clothes and wasted some time. I kept Mr. Chen waiting for a long time." Waiting for a long time? Chen Tao had just come in for less than 3 minutes. The speed at which this woman came and changed her clothes made Chen Tao feel a little surprised. This speed saves time too much. Of course, Chen Tao was not interested in knowing how this woman did it. His purpose of coming here was to buy a villa. Chen Tao slowly sat back on the sofa, looked at the woman, and said, "Not long." The woman smiled, she sat down on the sofa opposite, then put the contract in her hand on the table, moved in front of Chen Tao, and said with a smile, "Well, let me introduce myself first. My name is Wu Yao, I am the person in charge of Tal Auction House." Wu Yao looked at Chen Tao, she smiled and said, "Sir, you look unfamiliar? What's your name?" Chen Tao said, "My name is Chen Tao, this is my lover, Ziking." Ziking nodded slightly at Wu Yao. Wu Yao smiled, she said, "So it's Mr. Chen and Miss Zi. There are 2 contracts here, this one is the contract for Beihua Yuan, and this one is for Yuehu Manor. Take a look." Wu Yao looked at Chen Tao and smiled and said, "If there is no problem, you can sign it." Chen Tao picked it up and took a quick look. Chen Tao is not professional in the field of law, and this is Tal District, these contracts are just formalities. It didn't work. Chen Tao picked up the pen and signed the 2 contracts. Wu Yao took the pen and signed her name on the contract. "Okay, then pay here." Wu Yao took out a timer and put it on the table, moving it in front of Chen Tao. Chen Tao raised his hand and placed it on the timer. 3,300 years. Chen Tao transferred this time into the timer. Looking at the time of 3,300 years displayed on the timer, Wu Yao's eyes lit up. She looked at Chen Tao with a special taste in her eyes. Chen Tao retracted his hand. Wu Yao said with a smile, "Mr. Chen, I don't know if what I said will make Mr. Chen dissatisfied. Mr. Chen is very familiar. I know almost all the rich people in Tar district. But Mr. Chen, I've never seen it before. I guess you came over the high wall from the rich area, right? Chen Tao looked at Wu Yao and said, well, I came from over there. Wu Yao smiled, then, is this the first time Mr. Chen has bought such a large villa? Chen Tao crossed his chest with his hands and looked at Wu Yao, yes. Wu Yao nodded slightly. If you buy a large villa, there are some things you need to pay attention to. I wonder if Mr. Chen needs me to remind you. If not, then forgive Wu Yao for talking too much. She looked at Chen Tao with a gentle, professional smile on her face. Every word she spoke was slow and gentle, for fear of offending Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, let's just say, this is my first time buying such a large villa, and there are still some things I don't understand. Wu Yao smiled, looked at Chen Tao and said, large villas are different from small villas. In small villas, only 1 or 2 maids can take care of the sanitation and other things in the villa. But in large villas, 1 maid is not enough. To maintain the daily operations of the Moon Lake Manor, at least 30 maids are needed. Chen Tao frowned slightly. Maid. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 48. Chen Tao looked at Wu Yao and said, are there no servants in the villa? Wu Yao smiled and said, when the original owner auctioned this villa, he also dismissed the servants. Now there are no servants in the villa. If you need it, Mr. Chen, I can help. Wu Yao looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile, you can hire servants. Chen Tao thought for a moment. It's not impossible to hire a servant, but it's too troublesome. Wherever there are people, there is humanity and sophistication. Chen Tao doesn't want to deal with that, and he doesn't like to boss others around as if they were his thugs. If you want a servant, maybe Xia Nebula's power can be used here. Thinking of this, Chen Tao looked at Wu Yao and said, no need. Wu Yao was slightly startled and looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, I have a solution. Hearing this, Wu Yao smiled and said, okay then. She stood up, looked at Chen Tao, and said with a smile, let's go, I'll take you to see the White Birch Garden and Moon Lake Manor. Chen Tao said, there is no need for Beiwa Yuan. Take us to Yuehu Manor. If you have decided to live in Yuehu Manor, there is no need to go to White Birch Garden. When Wu Yao heard this, she nodded slightly, okay. In the parking lot at the entrance of the building, Gao Peng sat in the passenger seat and looked outside through the windshield window in front. The gate of the tower building could be seen in that direction. At this time, the man whom Gao Peng called Zhao Tai came to the passenger seat and knocked on the window. Gao Peng glanced at Zhao Tai. The driver next to him pressed the button. The window slowly lowered. Gao Peng said calmly, how is the investigation going? Zhao Tai said, his name was Chen Tao, and he was from the slums. Later, for some reason, he got a large amount of time. Because the source was unknown, he was hunted by Black Swan. He resisted arrest on the way and was killed. Hundreds of people. After that, Black Swan classified him as a criminal and wanted and hunted him. Yesterday he used some unknown means to escape into the Tar district. Hearing this, Gao Peng touched the crutch in his hand and said, so, that guy has nothing to rely on in the Tal district. He just has a fortune. Zhao Tai nodded slightly, that's true. The corners of Gao Peng's mouth raised slightly, and he squinted his eyes and said, as the saying goes, a strong dragon does not suppress a local snake, but this guy is better. He is not a dragon yet, so he came to provoke me. He thinks my Gao family is easy to deal with, right? With that said, Gao Peng looked at Zhao Tai and said, deal with him. I don't want to see him here again tomorrow. Okay, Zhao Tai nodded. Zhao Tai and Gao Peng only knew that Chen Tao was wanted, but did not know about Chen Tao's abilities. The reason for this is that in order to avoid social unrest, Black Swan deliberately made Chen Tao's abilities a high-level secret. Communication between the Tal district and the Rich district is already difficult. It is good to be able to find out so much. It is naturally impossible to come close to Black Swan's high-level secrets. Here we come, Gao Peng said suddenly. When Zhao Tai heard this, he looked at the gate of the tower building. There, Wu Yao, Chen Tao, and Ziyi Qing were walking out of the building. See this? Zhao Tai narrowed his eyes, took out a pistol from his waist, and strode towards Chen Tao. At the same time, do you want to drive my car? Wu Yao looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile. Chen Tao said, you drive your car, and I'll drive my own car and just follow you. Wu Yao nodded slightly. Suddenly, Wu Yao's peripheral vision noticed something wrong next to her, and her expression changed slightly. Noticing the change in Wu Yao's gaze, Chen Tao also looked over there. As soon as I saw it, a man came over. He raised his hand and pointed the pistol with a silencer at Chen Tao's head. The man didn't say a word and just pulled the trigger. Pft. A soft sound. A bullet ejected from the silencer and shot into Chen Tao's head. Chiang. There was a soft sound of a hard object colliding. Chen Tao's forehead burst into flames, and then the flames dissipated. There was no injury at all on Chen Tao's forehead. Zhao Tai was stunned for a moment. He frowned and pointed his gun at Chen Tao. Boo-hoo, the sound made by the pistol with the silencer was particularly weird. But the power of the bullets ejected from the silencer is not low. Zhao Tai fired several shots and the bullets flew towards Chen Tao. Suddenly, the bullet disappeared out of thin air. Zhao Tai was slightly startled. What's going on? Chen Tao opened his hand, and the bullet slipped from his palm and fell to the ground. Bah, bang, bang. The bullet fell on the hard floor, making a clanging sound, which was very pleasant to the ears. Zhao Tai's eyes widened, his face full of disbelief. Chen Tao took out his pistol and pointed it at Zhao Tai. Zhao Tai pulled the trigger. Click. The pistol made a gunshot. This is the sound of the bullet being fired. Zhao Tai's expression changed. Bang. Chen Tao pulled the trigger and the bullet flew out of the gun. Passed through Zhao Tai's forehead. Zhao Tai's body fell to the ground, motionless. Seeing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, and he looked at the car not far away. Zhao Tai came from the direction of that car just now. Chen Tao's eyes met Gao Peng's in the windshield. Gao Peng's expression changed slightly. Drive, drive. Gao Peng said quickly. The driver started the car. The car drove away slowly. Chen Tao watched the car slowly leave, and he did not stop it. Chen Tao retracted his gaze, looked at Wu Yao, and said, let's go. Wu Yao smiled and nodded slightly. She picked up the car key and pressed it. A pink sports car drove up and stopped in front of Wu Yao, and the door slowly opened. Wu Yao got in the car. In this Tal district, assassinations and deaths are very normal. Wu Yao has seen a lot, so of course there is no emotional fluctuation. Wu Yao did not drive away immediately. She opened the window and looked at Chen Tao next to her. At this time, Wu Yao saw a black sports car slowly coming from a distance and slowly stopped in front of Chen Tao. Wu Yao's eyes lit up. This sports car has no wheels, but instead has 4 square black substances. This black substance seems to have an inexplicable power, which keeps the car at a certain distance from the ground. The whole car is streamlined, with a low front and cool headlights. The whole car gives people a strong sense of metal. Very cool. Wu Yao's eyes trembled slightly, and she said, Mr. Chen, what kind of car is this? So cool. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly when he heard it, and he said, I call it Black Lightning. It's a car I made. There is only one in the world. Wu Yao's eyes brightened, and she got out of the car. Seeing Wu Yao's actions, Wu Yao came to the window next to Chen Tao. She looked at the car in front of her, her eyes lit up, her hand stroked the car, she smiled, and then looked at Chen Tao and said, "I like cars very much, Mr. Chen, can I sit in your car?" Chen Tao said, "Well, later, this is a two-seater." Wu Yao was slightly startled. She looked at Zicheng sitting in the co-pilot seat, she showed an apologetic smile, and said, "Sorry, I am a car fan, and I am a little excited to see such a special car. Then I will go to drive first and lead the way." Chen Tao nodded slightly. "You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 49. Inside the car. Gao Peng frowned. His eyebrows furrowed deeper as he recalled what had just happened. What's going on with that guy? The bullet has obviously hit him. Is his head made of steel? Gao Peng frowned deeply, and the one who caught the bullet with his bare hands, what on earth is that? What's going on? Gao Peng wanted to break his head, but he couldn't figure out what was going on with that man. Could it be that? An artificial human. Gao Peng thought of the artificial human technology proposed by scientists a long time ago. At that time, scientists wanted to create robots that were like humans. That matter attracted a lot of attention, but later they could only create a few robots that could talk to humans and barely do some ordinary things. Later, slowly, the artificial human technology was forgotten. When I think of this, I think of Chen Tao's body that cannot even be penetrated by bullets. Gao Peng felt more and more that Chen Tao was a cyborg. If he really made a human being, bullets, knives, and guns would probably be useless. Gao Peng's eyebrows wrinkled slightly. At the same time, so big. Under the leadership of Wu Yao, Chen Tao, and Zicheng came to Yuehu Manor. After entering the gate of the manor, the three of them stood on the balance car and headed towards the villa along the flat road. Zicheng stood on the balance car. She looked at the grasslands on both sides, her eyes full of surprise. Chen Tao was holding the handle of the balance car. He looked at Zicheng, who looked surprised next to him. He was in a cheerful mood and looked at the surrounding grasslands. It feels good to look at this wide field of view. Chen Tao withdrew his gaze and looked forward. Suddenly there are three forks ahead. Wu Yao slowly stopped. Chen Tao and Zicheng also stopped. Wu Yao looked at Chen Tao and Zicheng, she smiled and said, "The left side leads to the golf course, the middle one leads to the villa, and the right side is to the Moon Lake. Moon Lake used to be a famous tourist attraction. There are many tourist facilities preserved there." She looked at Chen Tao and Zicheng and said with a smile, "Which side should you look at first?" Chen Tao said, "Let's take a look at the villa. After all, that's where we live." Wu Yao nodded slightly and said, "Okay." Follow Wu Yao to the front of the villa. In front is a large swimming pool with a fountain in the middle and water emerging from the fountain. Behind the large swimming pool is a villa. The villa has 3 floors and is very spacious, but the height of each floor is much higher than that of a normal building. The top is luxuriously decorated, making it look like a Western castle. Next to the villa, it is surrounded by green trees, which adds a special beauty to the villa. It's so big Zicheng couldn't help but sigh after seeing this. This is indeed very big. Although it is 3 floors, the 3 floors Chen Tao has seen elsewhere are completely different. This villa covers a large area and the height of each floor is different from ordinary buildings, highlighting a sense of luxury and sophistication. Wu Yao smiled and said, "Let's go in and have a look." Wu Yao put the balancing car aside. There were also a bunch of balancing cars there, which was where the balancing cars were placed. This manor is too big. If you don't drive a balance bike and just walk, you will probably be tired. Chen Tao followed Wu Yao into the villa. After Wu Yao opened the door, She handed the key to Chen Tao. She smiled and said, "These are all the keys to this villa." Chen Tao took it, looked at the bunch of keys, and then looked around. The interior decoration of this villa is exquisite and luxurious. As soon as you enter the door, you will find the living room, which is very spacious. The sofa is exquisite, and the TV screen in front is directly attached to the wall. It is very thin and is almost as big as a projection cloth. Wu Yao said with a smile, "There is a swimming pool in front of the villa and an artificial hot spring pool in the back. If you like hot springs, you can go behind the villa. In addition to this, the villa also has an underground parking garage." Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "Let's see for ourselves." When Wu Yao heard this, she nodded slightly. Chen Tao is quite satisfied with this villa. Of course, Chen Tao doesn't know much about this and is not a professional. But the man named Gao Peng likes this villa so much, so this place must be very good. Chen Tao went upstairs. There was a bedroom on the second floor, and he entered the bedroom. The bedroom is unusually spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows to the front. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, you can see the distant scenery. Looking far away from here, you can just see the emerald green grass and the clear lake not far away. The view is very nice. So beautiful. Zi Ching's voice came from beside her. Chen Tao came back to his senses and looked at Zi Ching beside him. Zi Ching stood beside him, looking at the scenery in front of her dreamily. Zi Ching wore a white strapless halter top today, revealing her fair shoulders. The white fabric was stretched high on the upper body, and underneath was an ultra-short denim skirt paired with black pantyhose. Her legs were slender and straight, and she wore a pair of black high heels, which made her look quite tall. A perfect mature figure paired with a delicate face looks very attractive. Now Zi Ching was looking at the scenery in front of her, her eyes full of novelty, and she looked at Chen Tao. Zi Ching smiled. It feels so good to be able to see this kind of scenery in the bedroom. Chen Tao raised his hand, put his arm around Zi Ching's shoulders, and pulled her into his arms. "Get closer to her face." Eyes facing each other. Chen Tao kissed her. Parted lips. Zi Ching's eyelashes moved, and her eyes looked at Chen Tao with watery light. When she met Chen Tao's sight, the corners of her mouth slightly raised, and she slowly leaned her little head on Chen Tao's arms and closed her eyes. Chen Tao gently stroked Zi Ching's hair, gently enjoying this moment of tenderness. "Mr. Chen, that." Suddenly, an inappropriate voice sounded behind Chen Tao. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao came back to his senses, and he looked at Wu Yao beside him. Wu Yao looked at Chen Tao, she looked at Chen Tao a little embarrassedly, and said, "That, can I try the car?" Chen Tao was slightly startled, he didn't expect this woman to make this request at this time. Wu Yao is a host, and she has always been very measured in her words since Chen Tao met her. At this time, she should know that Chen Tao doesn't want to be disturbed. But she still disturbed him. Wu Yao is not stupid, so there is only one possibility. This woman is a real car fan, and her love for high-end cars makes her unable to remain calm. Chen Tao looked at Zi Ching in his arms. Ziking smiled and said, "If she wants to try it, let her try it, okay." Chen Tao smiled, gently stroked her hair, then looked at Wu Yao, nodded slightly, and said, "Okay." Wu Yao's eyes lit up, and she smiled, "Thank you very much." He did what he said, but Chen Tao was relatively free now. Besides, Wu Yao's status in this tall district is not low, and it is also a good thing to make friends with her. The three of them went downstairs. Black lightning came from a distance and landed in front of Chen Tao. The car door opened automatically. Chen Tao's eyes fell on Wu Yao. But he found that Wu Yao's eyes were shining, and her expression was like a gem collector who saw a piece of peerless jade. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 50. Wu Yao walked around the car, She turned around, her hands carefully stroking the car body, her eyes shining. She looked like evaluating a piece of beautiful jade. Wu Yao looked at Chen Tao and said, "Mr. Chen, does this car have car keys?" Chen Tao said, "No." Wu Yao was slightly stunned. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "No car keys? Then, how did you move the car just now?" Her face was full of surprise and curiosity. Chen Tao didn't pay much attention to this question before, but Wu Yao asked this question, let alone Chen Tao wanted to know. Chen Tao didn't know the answer, so of course Chen Tao couldn't tell Wu Yao. Chen Tao looked at the car and said, "Black Lightning, you answer her question." Black Lightning's lights lit up, and a mechanical voice sounded. "Okay, master." It was the voice of the car. When Wu Yao heard this, her eyes lit up and she looked at Black Lightning, "Can this car still answer my questions?" Of course Black Lightning said, "I am fully intelligent. If you have any questions, you can ask me directly." The mechanical voice maintained the same tone. Wu Yao smiled, and she gently stroked the car and said, "Just ask the one just now." "There is no car key. Mr. Chen can't use the car key to notify you." "How do you know that Mr. Chen wants to drive?" "I have bound the program with the owner. If the owner wants to use the car, I can know whether he needs it through the brainwave signals he emits. If the owner needs it, I will come." The mechanical electronic sound slowly sounded. Wu Yao's eyes lit up, and she said, "Brainwave signal, what kind of technology is this?" She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Mr. Chen, how did you know?" Chen Tao crossed his arms and did not answer Wu Yao. Seeing this, Wu Yao pursed her lips and said with a smile, "I am too excited. This is a trade secret, right?" She retracted her gaze and looked at Black Lightning. She looked at the 4 black square materials that replaced the wheels of Black Lightning. She said, "What is this?" "This is Z2 material. It can sense the magnetic force of the planet and collect it at the same time. With the help of magnetic force, the car body can leave the ground." The voice of Black Lightning came slowly. Wu Yao pursed her lips, her cheeks flushed, and she seemed a little excited. "Z2 material, a material I have never heard of." Wu Yao looked at Chen Tao and said, "It's amazing." She looked at Chen Tao with admiration. Chen Tao blinked and said nothing. Wu Yao stroked the body of Black Lightning with her hand. She said, "Then Black Lightning, can I let me drive you?" The lights of Black Lightning lit up, and a mechanical voice sounded, "The master allows it, yes." Wu Yao got into the car. Chen Tao crossed his arms and looked at this scene. "Tao," a voice came from the side. Chen Tao looked back at Ziking beside him. Ziking looked at Chen Tao and said, "I'm a little sleepy. You stay with her. I'll go upstairs to rest first." Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Ziking, who was a little listless. He approached Ziking, raised his hand, gently stroked the hair on her cheek, and put it behind her ear. He said, "Are you okay? You don't look energetic." Ziking smiled and raised her hand to cover Chen Tao's big hand. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "It's okay. I have the habit of taking a nap. It's almost noon now, and there are so many things in the morning. I'm a little tired." Chen Tao was relieved. He approached Ziking, kissed her forehead, and said softly, "Then you go up first, I'll go to accompany you later." Ziking hummed, and a smile appeared on her face. Chen Tao watched Ziking walk towards the villa. Seeing Ziking enter the gate, he retracted his gaze and looked at Wu Yao. Wu Yao was driving the Black Lightning on this wide grassland. This manor is very large, and there is enough space for a car to run. Chen Tao couldn't see Wu Yao's expression, and he was too lazy to think about it. He took out his phone. "Xiao Ti, help me order some takeaway, just like before, 2 soup noodles." It was almost 12 o'clock now, and it was almost noon. "I took Ziking out for a walk this morning, and she was tired. But lunch couldn't be skipped." Ziking liked the soup noodles in the slums very much. She seemed to like it last time, so I could buy it for her again. Okay, master. The screen of the phone lit up, and Xiao Ti's playful voice sounded, the order has been placed. Chen Tao put away the phone. Shua. There was a light sound. Chen Tao saw the black lightning car parked in front of him. The car door opened. Wu Yao sat in the driver's seat, her delicate cheeks flushed, her eyes staring straight ahead, as if she had not recovered from the speed. Chen Tao looked at Wu Yao, and then he came to her side and said, "How do you feel?" When Wu Yao heard this, she came back to her senses and looked at Chen Tao. She smiled and said, "So exciting. So happy. So excited." She was really excited, and her speech speed was much faster than usual. Chen Tao also felt the same way. It was really exciting when he drove the car for the first time. Wu Yao looked at Chen Tao and said, "Thank you." She suddenly approached Chen Tao. Chen Tao felt his face getting hot. He was slightly startled. Wu Yao sat back in her seat, her eyes full of excitement, looking at Chen Tao with admiration. She said, "It is my lifelong dream to be able to ride in a car like this once. You made my dream come true, you are my idol." Chen Tao blinked. She just kissed him. She was so excited, and the kiss to her idol had no other meaning. Chen Tao stood up and looked at Wu Yao's excitement. Chen Tao said, "Looking at you like this, I feel it's a bit cruel to let you leave, but, Miss Wu, I think you should leave." Wu Yao was only responsible for bringing Chen Tao here to see the house. It was obviously not appropriate for her to stay here. Wu Yao was slightly startled. She looked at Chen Tao. She slowly adjusted her mood, then got out of the car. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Mr. Chen, I'm sorry, I just lost my composure. I'm a crazy sports car collector, and I like cars very much. When I see this kind of high-tech car, I can't help it." Wu Yao looked at Chen Tao and said, "Mr. Chen, can you sell this car to me? I can exchange everything I have with you." She is indeed a crazy sports car collector. Chen Tao looked at Wu Yao and said, "You should know that I have no interest in time." Wu Yao was slightly startled, and she said, "Well, I know. With the assets you have, Mr. Chen, I think even if I give all my wealth to Mr. Chen probably won't be interested. But, I really like this car." She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Mr. Chen, please, I can give everything I have for this car." Chen Tao looked at Wu Yao and said, "Everything?" Wu Yao nodded firmly, "Yes, everything, including me."